Zailna Akafer was the kind of woman people looked at twice, not because she was loud or flashy. Quite the opposite. She was the kind of beautiful that crept up on you, warm brown skin that caught light like polished cedar, deep-set eyes that held entire conversations before her mouth ever opened, and a stillness about her that made a room feel quieter just from her presence. At 34, she carried herself like someone who had learned to be strong not by choice, but by requirement. She was sitting in the waiting area of Johns Hopkins Children's Center on a Tuesday morning in early March, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The fluorescent lights above her hummed their familiar tune. She knew this waiting room the way most people know their own kitchen, every crack in the ceiling tile, every squeak in the third chair from the left, every nurse's name on the morning rotation. She had been coming here for 3 years. Her daughter Amara was 7 years old and had a blood disorder that required regular transfusion support. The name of it was long and medical, and Zailna had memorized every syllable. She had also memorized the face of every doctor who had ever stood in front of her with folded hands and careful words. She had learned to read the pauses between their sentences. This morning, like most mornings here, Zailna sat alone. She was watching the entrance doors out of habit when a man appeared at the front desk. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark-skinned, with a quiet way of moving that reminded her of someone carrying something heavy on the inside. He had his back to her. He was signing something. One of the nurses said something to him, and he nodded without turning around. Zailna set her cold coffee down slowly, something about the angle of his shoulders, the way he tilted his head when he listened, the particular stillness of him. Her heart knocked once against her ribs like a fist against a door. She stood up from her chair without knowing why. But by the time she reached the desk, the entrance doors were already closing behind him, and all that remained was the faint memory of a silhouette she had spent 6 years trying to forget. Zailna Akafer had built a life that looked ordinary from the outside and felt like holding your breath from the inside. She lived in a narrow row house on Harford Road in northeast Baltimore, the kind of street where everybody knew your car and nobody knew your business. The house had 3 bedrooms, a front porch with a crooked railing she kept meaning to fix, and a backyard small enough that Amara could cross it in 12 steps. Zailna had counted. She worked 4 days a week as a licensed practical nurse at the University of Maryland Medical Center on South Green Street, pulling long shifts in the cardiac unit where the work was demanding and the patients were grateful. Her colleagues respected her. Her supervisors trusted her. She showed up early and stayed late and never complained loudly, though sometimes in the break room she would press her forehead against the cool surface of the vending machine and just breathe for 30 seconds before going back out. Her mother, Cleotha Akafer, lived 12 minutes away on Eager Street and came over every Sunday to cook and argue about unimportant things like whether Zailna was salting her greens properly. Cleotha was a round, sharp-eyed woman of 61 who wore her silver locks pinned up and called everyone baby, whether she liked them or not. She adored Amara with a ferocity that sometimes made Zailna's chest ache. Zailna's best friend Surrey Ballard had known her since nursing school and understood without needing explanation when Zailna called at 11 at night just to hear another voice. Surrey was funny and blunt, and the kind of friend who would drive 40 minutes in the rain without asking why. And then there was Amara, who was small for her age but talked like someone twice it, who drew elaborate pictures of animals she invented herself and gave them all human problems, who had her mother's mouth and someone else's eyes, and a laugh that made nurses stop in the hallway just to hear it again. Amara, who needed blood she couldn't make enough of on her own. That Tuesday evening, after settling Amara home from the hospital with Cleotha, Zailna sat on her porch in the cold March air and opened the notification she had been avoiding all day. A message from the hospital's donor coordination team. The same rare blood type had been donated again. Same donor profile. 3rd year in a row. Consistent. Anonymous. Reliable as sunrise. Whoever this person was, they had been quietly keeping her daughter alive. Zailna stared at the message until the porch light flickered. She had no name, no face, just a pattern, and somehow that pattern felt more faithful than anything else in her life had been in years. Demarion Ashby did not look like a man carrying a secret. He looked like a man who had simply decided to take up less space in the world. He was 36 years old, 6 feet 2 inches of quiet precision. Dark-skinned, with a sharp jaw and eyes the color of strong coffee, the kind of eyes that noticed everything and revealed very little. He kept his hair cut close and his face clean. When he walked into a room, women noticed him in the way you notice something beautiful that doesn't know it is. He never seemed to. He lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment on Barclay Street in Baltimore's Remington neighborhood, kept it clean the way men do when cleanliness is the only thing they can fully control. He drove a 10-year-old charcoal gray pickup truck that ran perfectly because he maintained it himself. He cooked his own meals, paid his bills on the first of the month, and went to bed at the same time every night. He was the maintenance supervisor at the Fitzgerald Apartments on St. Paul Street downtown, a mid-rise building with 40 units and more broken things than management liked to admit. He was good at the job, better than good. He had a gift for understanding how things worked and a patience for figuring out what had gone wrong. The irony of that was not lost on him. Every 3 months before sunrise, he drove to the American Red Cross Donation Center on North Charles Street. He always arrived before the doors opened. He always brought his donor card already filled out. The nurses on the early shift knew him by name. Miss Paulette always had his intake paperwork ready before he sat down, and young Trennis always asked him if he wanted extra juice this time. He always said no. He always sat in the same chair. He always stared at the same water stain on the ceiling tile while the needle went in. And when it was done, he signed the form, declined the sticker, and walked back out into the dark morning air like a man completing a quiet act of penance. Nobody at the donation center knew why he came. Nobody at his job knew either. Only Demarion knew. And even he had stopped examining it too closely. It was easier to just keep showing up, keep giving, keep moving. But that Tuesday morning in early March, something changed in the air between him and Miss Paulette. As he was pulling on his jacket to leave, she said something she had never said before. She didn't mean to say it. It slipped out the way true things sometimes do. "That little girl had a rough week," she said quietly, almost to herself. But she made it through again. Demarion stopped with one arm in his sleeve. He stood there for 3 full seconds before walking out the door. But for the first time in 3 years, he did not feel nothing on the way home. 6 years ago, Zolna Ukifka and Demarion Ashby had been the kind of couple that made people believe in something. They had met at a neighborhood cookout on Federal Hill on a Saturday in June that smelled like charcoal and cut grass. Zolna had come with Sai and had not been looking for anything except potato salad and a reason to laugh. Demarion had come with a kawak and had not spoken more than 20 words the entire afternoon, until Zolna made a comment about the music that made everyone around her laugh, and he found himself laughing too, genuinely, from somewhere he had forgotten existed. He asked for her number standing next to someone else's grill with mustard on his shirt. She gave it to him because of the way he asked, like it mattered, but he would survive the no. They dated for 8 months before she moved into his apartment on Ulst Avenue in East Baltimore, a second-floor unit with tall windows and radiator heat that clanked all winter long. They had a system for the kitchen, and a disagreement about the thermostat, and a Sunday morning routine involving pancakes and bad television that became the best part of both their weeks. Demarion was saving for a ring. He had not told her yet, but Kolpatha suspected and said nothing, which for Kolpatha was the loudest possible approval. Zolna had started looking at 3-bedroom homes in Laravel. She had bookmarked 4 of them on her phone. She had not shown him yet either. They were 2 people quietly building toward the same destination without comparing notes, which was both beautiful and their eventual undoing. The night that ended everything came in a November rain. Demarion came home from a double shift to find Brudruck Lunna leaving their apartment. Brudruck was Zolna's kawaka, a man Demarion had met twice and trusted less each time. He was coming down the stairs with his jacket in his hand and a look on his face that was too comfortable for someone who was supposed to be a stranger in their space. Zolna was at the top of the stairs. She started explaining immediately. Rudrock had helped her move a piece of furniture. The bed frame in the guest room had collapsed and she couldn't lift it alone, and Damuran wasn't answering his phone. Every word was true. Damuran heard none of it. He had grown up watching men lie with calm voices and easy explanations, and something inside him locked shut with a sound he felt but did not hear. He did not yell. He did not throw anything. He simply went to the bedroom, pulled out a bag, and began packing with the terrifying efficiency of someone who had already decided. Zulna stood in the doorway telling the truth to a man whose ears had stopped working. By morning, he was gone. By the following week, he had transferred temporarily to a job in Richmond, Virginia, changed his phone number, and convinced himself that walking away was the same thing as protecting himself. He did not know, on the night he left, that Zulna had missed her cycle twice already. He did not know she was carrying his daughter. Zulna found out she was pregnant 6 weeks after Damuran disappeared from her life. She sat on the edge of her bathtub on Hufford Road. She had already moved back to her mother's neighborhood by then, and held the test in both hands and felt something that was not quite joy and not quite grief, but contained pieces of both. She thought about calling him. She reached for her phone 3 separate times. But his number no longer worked, and the silence on the other end of those failed calls taught her something she did not want to learn. She tried another way. She called Cuswell Ushby, Damuran's older brother, whom she had met at family gatherings and always found slightly cold toward her, the kind of cold that smiles with its mouth and not its eyes. She told Cuswell she had something important to tell Damuran and asked if he could pass along a message or a way to reach him. Cuswell said he would. He did not. What Cuswell told Damuran, when he finally mentioned it weeks later, was that Zulna had been calling through the family trying to get money, that she was telling people she was pregnant to cause problems, that it was best to leave it alone. Cuswell Ushby had never liked Zulna Ukifka. He had decided this before she ever gave him a real reason to, the way some people make up their minds about others based on nothing more than instinct and ego. He thought his brother was better off. He thought he was protecting him. He told himself this so many times it became a truth he could live with. Damuran, already wounded and already 300 miles away, chose to believe his brother because believing the alternative, that he had walked away from something real over something wrong, was a cost he could not afford to pay at the time. So he let it go. And Zulna, who had tried and been lied about and had nothing left to try, stopped reaching. She had a daughter on a Wednesday in late July. 8 pounds 2 ounces. She named her Amara, which meant grace, because grace was what Zulna was determined to carry into whatever came next. Kolpatha was in the delivery room. Sai was in the waiting area with snacks and flowers and tears she refused to explain. The space where a father should have been stayed empty. Zulna looked at her daughter's face for the first time and saw, immediately and with a certainty that went straight through her, that Amara had her father's eyes. She decided in that moment not to speak of it. She tucked that truth somewhere deep and quiet and told herself it was for Amara's protection. She told herself that for 6 years. The scheduling error happened on a Thursday. The hospital's donor coordination system had double-booked a time slot, and Damuran had been redirected from his usual private intake room to the main corridor registration desk near the elevator bank on the 4th floor of Johns Hopkins Children's Center. He had not been in this part of the building before. He did not know it was the oncology and hematology floor. He was simply following the instructions the front desk gave him, donor card in hand, headphones in, moving through the corridor the way he moved through most things. Quietly, efficiently, already thinking about what he needed to fix at the fjord when his shift started at noon. He was almost to the desk when he heard a child laugh. It was a specific kind of laugh. High and bright and completely unself-conscious, the way children laugh before the world teaches them to be careful about joy. He pulled one headphone out. 30 feet ahead of him, a woman was walking with a little girl toward the treatment wing. The woman had her back to him. She was tall and slim with natural hair pinned up at the back of her neck, wearing a caramel-colored coat he did not recognize. But he recognized the way she walked, the precise way she carried her shoulders, the slight lean forward when she was focused on something. He had spent 2 years watching that walk cross their apartment, cross parking lots, cross rooms full of people coming directly toward him. His feet stopped. The little girl looked up at that moment, the way children sometimes do when they feel eyes on them, and she looked directly at Demarion from 30 feet away and smiled, the reflex of a child, automatic, innocent, warm. But Demarion did not breathe, because the little girl's eyes were his eyes, the shape of them, the particular heaviness of the lower lid, the way they tilted slightly at the outer corners. He had seen those eyes in the mirror every morning for 36 years. He put one hand flat against the wall beside him. The woman, Zaelna, his mind said her name before his heart was ready, had not turned around. She was guiding the girl through the doors of the treatment wing, one hand gentle on the small of her daughter's back. Demarion pushed off the wall and walked toward the elevator. He did not know why. He pressed the button. The doors opened. He stood in front of them. He could not make himself step inside. He stood there until the doors closed on their own. Then he stood there some more. He did not go to work that day. He called his assistant at the Fitzgerald, said something vague about a personal appointment, and drove home to Barclay Street in a state that was not quite shock and not quite grief, but was thick with both. He sat at his kitchen table without turning on a light and stayed there as the March morning moved through the window and the apartment filled with the kind of quiet that asks questions. He opened his phone. He searched her name, Zaelna Akafer. Her social media profiles were private, locked to strangers, and he stared at her profile photo for a long time. It was small and partially obscured, but it was unmistakably her. Older, quieter in the face. Still the most arresting face he had ever seen in a room. He could not access anything else. He set his phone down and pressed both palms flat on the table and breathed. Then he picked the phone back up. He searched her mother's name instead. Cleotha Akafer, Baltimore. Cleotha's profile was not private because Cleotha had never learned to make it private, and Surrey had given up trying to teach her. There were photos of Sunday dinners and church programs and birthday celebrations. And there, 14 months ago, was a birthday post. A little girl in a pink dress standing in front of a cake with 7 candles. Big eyes. Wide smile. A laugh caught mid-frame. Asterisk happy birthday to my heart, my Amara baby. 7 years of grace and fight. God knew what he was doing. Asterisk Demarion counted backward with his fingers. 7 years old. Which meant she was born the summer after he left. Which meant she was conceived the fall before, which meant the last month he and Zaelna were together. His hands were trembling when he set the phone face down on the table. He sat in the dark kitchen on Barclay Street for 2 hours and 20 minutes, completely still, while the truth he had been accidentally circling for 3 years moved through him like weather. He waited outside the hospital parking garage on Orleans Street for 3 evenings before she appeared. He had not planned what to say. He had written versions of it in his head during long sleepless nights and torn every version apart before morning. There was no right way to say any of it. There was only the saying. On the 3rd evening, a Wednesday, he saw her come through the garage stairwell door with Amara's hand in hers. Amara was wearing a yellow jacket and carrying a backpack with a bear on it and talking with both hands the way she apparently always did. Zaelna was listening with her head slightly bent, and that look on her face that Demarion remembered, full attention, full presence, like nothing in the world existed outside this child. He stepped out from beside his truck. Zaelna saw him when she was 8 feet away and her whole body changed, every muscle locked. Her eyes went wide for 1 second before something harder replaced it. She put herself slightly in front of Amara, a motion so instinctive she probably didn't know she did it. Demarion kept his hands visible. He did not move toward her. Zaelna, he said, her name in his mouth. After 6 years, she said, you need to leave. Her voice was flat and controlled, and only someone who had once known her well would hear the shake underneath it. Just need to ask you one thing, he said. No, Zaelna. I said no, Demarion. Amara was looking between them with the alert expression of a child who understands more than adults want her to. Zaelna crouched to Amara's level and said quietly, baby, go wait by the car. The blue one, right there where I can see you. Don't move. Amara went. She looked back once. Zaelna stood back up and faced him. The parking garage was dim and cold and smelled like exhaust and concrete. And in that light, Demarion thought she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever stood in front of, and that thought made everything worse. "Is she mine?" he asked. Zaelna's jaw moved. She looked at the ground for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked back up at him with eyes that held 6 years of everything she had never said to anyone. "Yes," she said, one word. Quiet as a door blowing open in a storm. Demarion sat in his truck in that parking garage for 45 minutes after Zaelna drove away. He did not cry. He was not sure he remembered how. He just sat with his hands in his lap and let the word yes move through him over and over like something he had to keep absorbing in small amounts, because the full weight of it all at once would have been too much to survive. He had a daughter. He had a daughter with a blood disorder. He had been donating blood to keep her alive for 3 years without knowing she was his. He drove home and sat on his bathroom floor at some point because that is where he ended up and he couldn't remember walking there. He stayed until his legs went cold. Zaelna drove directly to her mother's house on Eager Street. She put Amara to bed and sat at Cleotha's kitchen table and told her everything. Not calmly, not in order. In pieces, the way people speak when the truth has been dammed up so long it comes out in every direction at once. Cleotha sat across from her and did not interrupt once, which was how Zaelna knew her mother understood the seriousness. Cleotha's hands were folded on the table, and her expression moved through several things: fury, sorrow, disbelief, and then something settled and ancient and maternal that meant she was already deciding how to carry this. When Zaelna finished, Cleotha was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That brother of his." A question. A verdict. Zaelna nodded. Cleotha stood up and moved around the table and put both arms around her daughter and held her with the specific grip of a mother who knows that some things cannot be fixed and can only be witnessed. 3 days later, a Saturday morning, Demarion Ashby knocked on the door of Cleotha's house on Eager Street. He was holding a bunch of yellow tulips because he didn't know if flowers were appropriate and they were the least romantic thing he could find and he needed to do something with his hands. Cleotha opened the door. She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that the morning air got colder. Long enough that he almost apologized for breathing. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider and let him in. They started small. Everyone agreed, without quite saying so, that small was the only safe place to begin. Demarion and Amara's first real time together was on a Sunday morning at Patterson Park, a wide green expanse in southeast Baltimore, where the walking paths curved between old trees and the boathouse sat quiet at the far edge of a still pond. Zaelna sat on a bench near the path's entrance with her coffee and her coat and her arms folded, present, watchful, not participating. Amara stood 3 feet in front of Demarion with her hands in her jacket pockets and her head tilted in the evaluating way she had inherited from her mother, and looked at him for a full 10 seconds before speaking. "Tall," she said. "I am," he said. "My friend Marcus is tall too, but he can't reach the top shelf at school either, so I don't know what the point is." Demarion almost laughed. He pressed it down. "That's a fair observation." Amara nodded, satisfied. "Do you know any good jokes?" He told her 3. She informed him calmly that all 3 were terrible and that she had heard better from her grandmother's church friends and they were elderly. He laughed then, completely without meaning to, a real laugh, from somewhere that had been locked for a long time. By the 3rd Sunday, Amara was walking beside him on the path with her hand occasionally bumping against his arm. By the 5th, she had started telling him about her animals. The ones she drew. The invented ones with human problems. She told him about an elephant named Gerald who was afraid of being too heavy for the people who loved him. Demarion listened to every word. From the bench, Zaelna watched him lean down to hear her better, watched Amara gesture widely with both hands explaining Gerald's emotional situation, watched her daughter tip her head back and laugh at something he said, and it came out bright and unguarded. Zaelna unfolded her arms. She left them there for 1 second before she folded them again, but Demarion noticed. He noticed everything. One Sunday, while Zaelna was getting refills on coffee from the park vendor, Amara looked up at him and said the thing she had apparently been building toward for weeks. "Do you know why I'm sick?" Demarion felt the question land in his chest. "No, baby," he said carefully. "I don't." Amara considered this. "My mommy says God needed someone brave and picked me." She paused. Do you think that's true? He opened his mouth, closed it. He sat down on the grass in front of her so their eyes were level, and he could see her face completely, those eyes, his eyes, looking at him with the clearest sincerity he had ever encountered in a human being. He could not answer. His throat would not cooperate. Amara patted his arm twice, the way someone comforts a friend who is having a hard time, and went back to watching the ducks on the pond. DeMarion drove to Coswell's house on Greenmount Avenue on a Tuesday evening in April without calling first. Coswell Ashby was 41 years old and lived in a wide brick house that he was proud of and kept immaculate and liked people to notice. He had a good job in logistics, a girlfriend named Patris who deserved better, and a talent for reframing his worst decisions as acts of love. He opened the door and saw his brother's face and immediately knew. "Come in," Coswell said. "Stand here," DeMarion said. It was the tone that told Coswell this would not be the kind of conversation he could manage with comfort and charm. DeMarion's voice was low and completely even in the way it got when he was somewhere past anger, in the territory where emotion becomes architecture, solid and load-bearing and extremely difficult to move. Coswell leaned against the doorframe. DeMarion said, "Tell me what you told her, and tell me what you told me, and don't move any of the pieces around." Coswell was quiet for a moment. Then he exhaled slowly and said, I was trying to protect you." "That's the last thing you get to say that sounds like a reason," DeMarion said. "Tell me the rest." So Coswell told him, all of it, without the framing he had used on himself for years, without the adjustments and justifications, just the sequence of events plain and in order. He had intercepted Zalena's calls. He had told her DeMarion had moved on. He had told DeMarion she was asking for money and making claims to cause trouble. He had made the decision for both of them and lived comfortably inside it for 6 years. When he finished, he looked at his brother and said, "I thought she was going to hurt you. I genuinely thought." "You have a niece," DeMarion said. Coswell blinked. 7 years old. She has a blood disorder. She has had it since she was 4. I have been donating blood to keep her alive for 3 years, and I did not know she was mine." He paused. Each sentence arrived separately with space between them so Coswell could feel the full weight of each one. "You took that from her, you took it from me, and you took it from Zalena." Coswell's face changed. Something that might have been genuine reckoning moved through it. "I'm sorry." DeMarion nodded once. Then he turned and walked back down the porch steps and got into his truck and drove away without another word. He did not speak to his brother again for the rest of the spring. Zalena did not break down in front of Amara. She had a rule about that, not because she was afraid of her daughter seeing emotion, but because she had decided long ago that Amara would grow up knowing that her mother was a safe place. That meant Zalena's grief had to find its own private hours, and it did, mostly between midnight and 3 in the morning when the house was quiet, and she could sit with things she couldn't carry in daylight. But on a Friday evening in April, after a difficult conversation with Amara's specialist about adjusting her treatment schedule, and a longer-than-usual shift at the hospital, and a drive home in rain that seemed personally motivated, Zalena walked into the hospital chapel on the 2nd floor of Johns Hopkins and sat in the last pew and put her face in her hands. She had not planned to go in there. She was just walking past, and the door was open. Surrey found her 20 minutes later because Surrey had a specific radar for Zalena in distress that had been calibrated over a decade of friendship. She sat on the floor in front of the pew and looked up at Zalena. "Talk," she said. Zalena said, "I'm still in love with him." Surrey did not look surprised. "I know. Been furious at him for 6 years. I know that too. It's not fair that he's being—" Zalena stopped. Started again. "He shows up every Sunday. He remembers every single thing Amara tells him. He looks at her like she's something he's afraid to break. He's not performing it, Surrey. It's real." Surrey nodded slowly. "And it is making it," Zalena said with great difficulty, "extremely hard to stay angry. And the anger was," her voice caught, "the anger was keeping me upright." Surrey was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Maybe you've been upright long enough, maybe you're allowed to lean now." Zalena pressed her fingers against her eyes. "He earned the anger," Surrey continued. "But you know as well as I do that he walked out on a lie, and his brother is the one who kept it going." She paused. "I'm not telling you to forgive it all tonight. I'm just saying anger kept you safe. Now you've got to decide if you want safe or if you want real. Zaylna sat with that for a long time. That night at 9:47, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was washing dishes. A text from a number she had resaved 2 weeks ago and moved to the bottom of her contacts where she wouldn't accidentally see it while looking for someone else. Can we talk? Just us. No history. Just now. She read it 4 times. Then she dried her hands. Then she read it once more. They met at Heavy Seas Alehouse on Lombard Street on a Thursday evening when Amara was with Cleotha, and the city was doing that early spring thing where the air can't decide between cold and kind and settles on both. Zaylna arrived 2 minutes before him, which she had planned because she needed to already be seated when he walked in. She needed to have chosen her position in the room. She needed one moment of control. He walked in at 7 exactly. She watched him scan the room, find her, and move toward her with that quiet, deliberate way of his, hands in his coat pockets, nothing rushed. They said hello and looked at the menus for longer than necessary. The first 10 minutes were careful. The kind of careful that happens between people who used to know each other's silences and are now afraid of them. He asked about Amara's most recent appointment. She told him. He listened the way he always listened, entirely, with his full attention, tracking every detail. She asked him about his job. He told her. She smiled at the part about a tenant on the 14th floor who kept calling about a heater that was working perfectly and just wanted someone to check on it. So you check on it, she said. Every time, he said. She looked at him. He ordered them both water and a shared appetizer without asking because he had remembered, and the remembering was quiet and simple and almost undid her completely. Later, over what remained of their food and most of the evening, he told her about Marcus. Marcus was 29 years old. He had been DeMarion's co-worker at a previous job 4 years before DeMarion ever started donating. Marcus had a rare blood type and had been in an accident on I-695 during a winter storm. The hospital searched for compatible blood for 11 hours. They found it too late. DeMarion had been in the waiting room. He had never stopped sitting in that waiting room in a way. Zaylna listened without interrupting. She watched his face while he talked, the careful stillness of it, the way his eyes moved slightly when something cost him to say, and understood, for the first time with complete clarity, that this man had been carrying Marcus every 3 months for 3 years, all the way into a donation chair that had been keeping their daughter alive. The universe had very particular ideas about things. When they walked out into the Lombard Street evening, the air had settled on kind. They moved toward the parking garage side by side. Unhurried, not quite together and not quite separate in that thin and significant space between the two near the corner, he reached over and took her hand, not holding it the way they used to, just his fingers finding hers in the dark, quiet, asking. She felt it move through her like something warming from the center out. She let him hold it for 3 seconds, then gently, carefully, she pulled her hand back. Yet, she said. He nodded. He didn't look hurt. He looked like a man who understood that yet was not no, and was willing to wait for the distance between them to become something they crossed together rather than alone. They told Amara on a Saturday afternoon in May at Cleotha's house on Eager Street. Cleotha had made lemon pound cake and sweet tea, and arranged the living room in a way that felt safe and soft, blankets on the couch, Amara's favorite throw pillow, the television off. Afternoon light coming through the front window in long, warm rectangles. Cleotha herself went to sit in the kitchen, because she understood that some things need a smaller room. Amara sat between her parents on the couch. She was wearing her yellow socks, the ones with the small ducks on them, and eating a piece of pound cake, and looking between Zaylna and DeMarion with the expression of a child who already suspects something significant is about to happen but is not afraid of it. They had agreed on what to say, age-appropriate, clear. No blame inside the words. Zaylna spoke first. She explained carefully and simply that DeMarion was Amara's father, that a long time ago grown-up problems had kept them apart and kept Amara from knowing him sooner, that the grown-up problems were not Amara's fault and had never been about her, that DeMarion had not known about her, and when he found out he came. Amara ate her pound cake and listened. When Zaylna finished, Amara was quiet for what felt like a very long time. Then she turned to DeMarion. Her eyes moved across his face with that particular thoroughness she had, cataloging, measuring, deciding. "So you were coming to the hospital," she said slowly, working it out, "giving your blood and you didn't even know it was me." Demarian's voice had stopped working. He nodded. Amara looked at him for another long moment. Then she set her plate on the coffee table, climbed off the couch, and climbed directly into his lap with the complete confidence of a child who has decided something and intends to act on it without further deliberation. She tucked her head under his chin. He sat very still. His arms came around her slowly, carefully, like a man holding something he had not believed he would ever get to hold. Zaelna put both hands over her mouth. From the kitchen doorway, Cleotha pressed her apron to her face. Amara said nothing else for a while. She just sat there, present, decided. Then, quietly, without lifting her head, she said, "I'm going to ask the nurse to give you the good crackers next time." And the living room of Cleotha's house on Eager Street filled with the specific kind of laughter that only comes after a long and particular sorrow, the kind that sounds, if you are standing in the kitchen doorway pressing your apron to your eyes, remarkably like relief. The donation center on North Charles Street opened at 6 in the morning. Demarian arrived at 5:53, the way he always did. The March morning was cold and still, the city barely stirring beneath a dark sky that had begun to pale only slightly at its easternmost edge. The streetlights were still on. A bus moved past, mostly empty. The corner carryout was just unlocking its gate. He sat in the same chair. The same one, third from the window, the one Miss Paulette always quietly reserved without ever being asked. The ceiling above him held the same water stain he had stared at for 3 years. He looked at it for a moment. He did not feel what he used to feel when he looked at it. The guilt was not gone. He did not think it would ever be entirely gone, and he had made his peace with carrying it as a kind of compass rather than a sentence. Marcus deserved to be remembered. Guilt that moved you toward something useful was just love with nowhere left to go. But it was different now. Trennis came to take his vitals and asked if he wanted extra juice this time. He said, "Maybe." She raised both eyebrows at the deviation from procedure and went to get the forms. He was sitting quietly, cuff on his arm, when he heard the door. Amara came in wearing her purple coat and her duck socks with sneakers, carrying a small paper bag in one hand and an apple juice box in the other. She was 6 weeks post her most recent treatment, and her specialist had used the word stabilizing 3 appointments in a row. It was not a cure. It was not a promise. But it was the best word Zaelna had cried over in 7 years. Amara marched across the donation center with the authority of someone who had been here before, which she had from the other side too many times to count, and dropped into the chair beside Demarian with the comfortable ease of someone settling into a seat that belongs to them. She held up the paper bag. Inside, a pack of goldfish crackers and a second apple juice. "The good ones," she said seriously. "I asked Miss Paulette." Miss Paulette at the desk pretended to be very busy with her paperwork. Demarian looked at his daughter, at her small face and his eyes and her mother's mouth and the complete uncalculated confidence with which she existed in the world, as if difficulty had taught her not caution but clarity. "You didn't have to come this early," he said. She shrugged. "I wanted to." A pause. She examined the apple juice box. "Also, Mommy said you always look nervous and I should see for myself." "I don't look nervous," he said. "You do a little," she said. She looked at him directly. "You look more nervous than me. And I'm the one who actually has to do the hard thing." He laughed. Behind Amara, the door opened again. Zaelna came in from the cold morning, still wearing her coat, a coffee cup in each hand, her hair pulled up the way it was on mornings when she moved through the world without performing anything for anyone. She looked at Demarian in the chair. She looked at Amara beside him, already opening the goldfish crackers. She looked at the two of them together, their matching eyes, Amara's feet swinging, the apple juice box already being offered to a man who didn't know what to do with being taken care of. She shook her head, not in frustration. In the way people shake their heads at something they cannot believe is real and also cannot believe took so long. She walked over and handed Demarian one of the coffees. He took it. Their hands touched for a moment around the cup. Neither of them moved away. Amara looked up at both of them, looked back at her crackers, and said to no one in particular, Finally, Miss Paulette made a sound at her desk that she immediately converted into a cough. Demarian settled back in the chair. Amara leaned her head against his arm. Zaelna pulled a chair from the row behind and sat close, not pressed together, not separate, but in that warm and deliberate space between two people who have decided that close enough is where they are going to begin. The needle went in. He looked at the ceiling. The water stain was still there. But for the first time in 3 years, in 6 years, in every year he had spent in this chair emptying something out of himself to make room for the guilt of living, sitting in this chair did not feel like punishment. It felt like staying. It felt like the place where the story stopped being about what was lost and became, finally and imperfectly, and with so much road still ahead, about what remained. And Amara ate her goldfish crackers and swung her feet and hummed something small and tuneless. And outside on North Charles Street, Baltimore woke up slowly, the way cities do, unhurried, imperfect, and still, somehow, full of light.